getting knocked out of the cup surprised probably nobody, but the manager's comments about Flynn Downs were somewhat unexpected. I don't think we had that on our bingo card for this season. Alfie, we spoke about this last week. So it's not a new story, but it was the language that the manager used in the press conference afterwards. And it kind of blew up a bit about his attitude was not good after Saints had apparently turned down an offer from Ipswich. Were you expecting that yesterday?
Well, I was not expecting the sort of, like you mentioned, explosive language that Ivan has come out with, to say it's a bit of a club problem, and that to say in simple English that he had a bad attitude in the last few days of the window. For a manager to come out and say that, it's one of two things. It's either poor from the manager, or he feels he's been forced to say something. And I gave Glen and Steve a little bit of a heads up that he wasn't particularly happy with not playing at the moment. Last week, we sort of talked about what Ivan had said after the match at Ipswich, where he was a little bit more sort of ambiguous about it and tried to keep things calm. And I think the club really wanted it to all sort of blow over once the window had shut. And obviously, we know there was late interest from Ipswich, who he nearly joined last summer. And that they just hoped that once the window had shut, that everything would get back to normal, and he'd be a squad player again. And clearly that's not been the case, because he's been left out of the squad again. And Ivan has, speaking to Adam Blackmore initially and then to George afterwards, made some pretty big comments. And it's very difficult to sort of see how that relationship becomes sort of welded together again. And to be fair, Ivan Jurić has been really honest with us, and that's what makes me think that. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, Flynn Downs is obviously a player who last season was really important, but at the end of the day, he's paid a lot of money to train and to play, and he hasn't necessarily deserved a squad, first team place this season, despite how good he was last year. Behind Leslie and Joe at the moment, for me, is probably fair. So you just want the players to be professional, and he sort of pointed out Cameron Archer as a big professional, Jan Bednarek as a big professional, but he feels he hasn't got that from Flynn, and we don't know the full story, so I'm not going to judge too harshly anybody in the situation. But yeah, it's certainly blown up rather than blow over, and I think they'll be really disappointed with how that's happened. And it worries me a little bit in the sense that obviously we'll get on to Adam Armstrong, who's gone out on loan, which I think is a good move in isolation. But Flynn's one of those players who next season, is championship reliable. He's ready for the championship. They had what it felt like some of a promotion-ready core. And this sort of last few months of the season threatens to disrupt that quite heavily. And, those few championship guarantee players you have, you kind of want to keep fairly happy and keep on the same page. So it'd be interesting to see where they go from here.
There's quite a bit to unpack, Glenn, because obviously he was an integral part of the team last year, player of the season, been less than spectacular this year. So has he got the right to kind of come out and chuck his toys out the pram? Or as Alfie says, it's only half the story. We only speak to the manager. We hear from him every week. We don't necessarily hear from the player. So we don't know his side of the story. So it's difficult to judge.
Well, on the face of it, which is all we've got, because we don't know what goes on behind the scenes. On the face of it, whenever he's set foot on the pitch with Ivan Jurić as a manager, he's been terrible. So I think he might have played the 1-0 defeat against West Ham. Might have played in that, but he definitely played. He came on as a sub against Manchester United and was part of the falling apart at the end, and he got called out at the end of that game. Along with other players as being, part of the problem at the end of the game, didn't add energy, didn't up the levels, that sort of thing. He had that weird performance in the first half against Nottingham Forest, where, to all intents and purposes, he was running around trying to get sent off. And that was ridiculous, and we haven't seen him since. Now, where those January games? I think Manchester United was January, and I think Forest was January. Where that fitted in with when this transfer issue happened, I don't really know. So can't really say. I mean, when we signed him, I was kind of hoping he'd be our Roy Keane figure. Do you know what I mean? I mean, for people who are too young who only know Roy Keane as a pundit and a comedian, Roy Keane was an exceptional player in the centre of Manchester United's midfield, and he drove the standards for the club and all the other players. And, I was hoping, whilst Flynn is never going to be mentioned in the same breath as Roy Keane, I was hoping he was going to be our version of it and really drive other players forward and be that central midfield player who was everywhere, all action. And it just hasn't happened. And this, you know, whatever's happened is not good, and it's kind of a final nail in that particular coffin that he was going to be this sort of inspirational figure. Because to throw your toys out, no matter how sort of like much he's done it, is not great. But at the moment, as Alfie said, he can't expect to be in the team, just based on, you know, what we've seen on the pitch. Joe Aribo deserves to start at the moment. He's the guy who's taken his place, and you know, and obviously Leslie's improved after being sort of frozen out under Russell Martin. So it's hard to make a case for him to be in the team, given the way that we only play really with two central midfielders. So yeah, it's a shame, and I hope he gets his head right. Players that we've had, I mean, Jan Bednarek for one, he's had, you know, he had his little thing when he went off to Aston Villa and came back, and there's been a bit of a redemption arc there. So hopefully Flynn can do the same thing, because to be honest, you know, we need him. We needed him at the start of the season, and we need him now to make that step up and become a functioning Premier League footballer. But I mean, I don't know what Jurić gains from coming out publicly with it. I know you get, you know, it's difficult when you get fired questions and it's not in your first language and stuff like that. And he doesn't seem the most, you know, I don't know what's the word. He doesn't seem the most, you know, the kind of guy that's gonna hold back if you ask him a question. He's too honest for his own good. But yeah, there you go. I just hope it sorts itself out.
Well, he did say, Steve, that everything is resolvable. So I kind of wonder, firstly, you know, is this kind of inevitable with the season that we're having, that there's going to be these kind of squabbles and differences of opinion, especially with the manager changing, but also kind of what needs to happen next? Does he need to come out and apologise, or does he just get his head down and try and earn his place back in the team?
Yeah, I mean, some kind of hybrid of all of those, I imagine. I mean, you can't just, I mean, regardless of what you deem your status to be in any particular dressing room, you can't just go throwing your toys out of the pram and expecting to be able to just walk straight back in as if nothing's happened. There has to be some kind of proper dialogue there behind the scenes. And I mean, Jurić, as you say, has said that it's resolvable. So I mean, maybe Jurić has to lay down the terms of what that is, what that means, whether that's a sort of just a private meeting where he says, "Yeah, sorry, I've been a bit of an idiot the last couple of weeks, but kind of felt there was an opportunity for me, and nobody let me explore it." It's like, well, you signed a contract, mate. That was 6 months ago. It's one of those where ultimately having only joined the club 6 months ago on a permanent deal, the weight of things are in the club's favour, I think, where you signed a relatively long-term contract. I mean, the contract was presumably a sizable pay rise on what he was on at West Ham as a sort of young up-and-coming player. So yeah, you're being compensated pretty well. I'm not even convinced Ipswich would pay any more, because they're notoriously not paying particularly high wages for anybody. So
that's the other thing. They're clearly planning for next season, aren't they? If they're thinking that he's a great player to bring in, because they're not thinking he can upkeep them up.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, given that, I mean, obviously, Morsey has been the mainstay of that midfield for, 3 or 4 years, but has looked like the sort of championship plodder that we all said he was this time last year. Kajust is a step up, but seems to only be able to play an hour, and so maybe you're thinking that Downs would slot in kind of as a bit of a hybrid, really, kind of taking the space of kind of both of those at different points in the game. But I just don't see. Yeah, I mean, I don't see him as, at the moment. He's shown nothing to suggest that he's a Premier League midfielder at the moment. In either a formation that was more or less tailor-made for him last season, and this under Russell Martin, and obviously since Jurić has come in, the system has has evolved pretty rapidly, and it's very, very different now. And I mean, the handful of appearances we've seen from him under the new manager, he's been found wanting, and I just don't think that if you're a player who's been putting those performances in, I don't see how you can. I mean, as much as professional footballers all have this huge degree of self-awareness and self-confidence, and think that they should walk into any professional football team, I just don't see how you can lack such self-awareness to appreciate that. Hang on, I've been a bit crap here. I think it's probably not the wisest to go shouting my mouth off when other players have been performing better. I mean, it's a relatively low bar, and yet he's still not come close to clearing it at the moment. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of those, as a player, get your head down and work your way back in. But now the fan base all knows about this as well. I mean, it would have been very easy for the club to have kept the vast majority of this under wraps. But now it's out there. Downs has got some trust in the fan base to win back, as well as amongst his management and teammates.
Yeah, he's either got to apologise, I guess, or wait for Russell Martin to get a new club somewhere and try and take him with him. When's the press conference this week, Alfie? Because I know this is probably going to be question number one.
Yeah, it's not scheduled in yet, but it's usually a Thursday or a Friday, so I'd expect Thursday afternoon.
We might find out a bit more. Bit more then.
But to be fair, what more is there to say on it? I suppose is what Ivan would probably say. I mean, at this point, you've said your piece. You've tried to keep it under wraps for over a week. You didn't call him out at the first opportunity. You clearly felt you've needed to now. That should be all there is to say, really. But I guess it will depend on how Flynn reacts.
Yeah.